oi, wie lang wird bleiben, noch schlafen und tragen die schändliche Keit? Wie lang wird glänzen, der Reichtum schaffen, vor dem, was bereut euer Breit? Wie lang wird glänzen, der Reichtum schaffen, vor dem, was bereut euer Breit? Wie lang wird stehen, Rückens gebeugen, gerniedert, heimlos verschmacht? Es tut schon wach auf und sie öffnet die Augen, der viel Eiserner Mann.
When Ferry Street became a place for immigrants to move to, what kinds of people moved there?
At that time, taken between 1900 and 1920, there was thousands and thousands of Jews leaving Russia, coming to America. A lot of them stayed in New York. Some stayed in Hartford. A few of them got up to Springfield. Less than a few got up to Amherst. That was what was happening. So it kind of dwindled down as it got into the suburbs of these big cities. And most of them became peddlers or worked in garment industries. We had a lot of garment industries in Springfield.
She can tell you about her family because they are involved with the history of Springfield. Sarah's a daughter of a pioneer.
Now, when you say her family's pioneers, what do you mean?
Well, they came over in 1905. They were in Springfield in 1905.
It was before a lot of organizations, so that families helped each other.
Their groups were Orthodox, and they were going to the areas like the Congress Street Shul, the Russian Shul, and the Beth Israel. Those three shuls absorbed them.
I was raised right here in Springfield. My parents came to Springfield in 1905, and my father was brought here by Rabbi Rappaport, who was the chief rabbi at that time, to be a chazan and a shechet at the Beth Israel Synagogue, which is then on Grays Avenue. And my family's lived here ever since. Whoever knew him in those early days said that he was a very talented chazan, shechet, mole. He was known as the Yankee Clipper up and down the Connecticut Valley, because they would come to pick him up from the small towns, and they all knew him. As a matter of fact, when I was born, my mother told me that he was at a bris, and he wasn't home at that time. And
Our
so, family
ultimately became very prominent in the community, and we're successful people here. And
it all began with Grays Avenue.
Well, I had two of the most wonderful parents in the world. My mother, her name was Sadie Broad, and it's a very large Broad family in this area, or at least settled here in this community. And she came to this country at age 14 by herself, and she came to her uncle Benjamin Berg, who was a pioneer in Springfield and a man that was a most remarkable man. He was a poet, he was a writer, he was a businessman, but he was one of the first settlers in Springfield. Everybody who came to Springfield came to Benjamin Berg, and she came to him. My mother and father were very distantly related, cousins, but far removed. And when she came here, she went to work in Dad's store. Everybody, all of the relatives that came to this country, all of them came and worked in my father's store. It was a big enough store to accommodate all of them.
Let me talk to you first about how they came here. They had a rabbi who was from their town who came to this Springfield, Rabbi Rappaport. And Rabbi Rappaport wrote back to my father and said, the grandfather said, Yitzchok, there's a Jewish colony here in Springfield. They don't have a Hebrew teacher, and it's going to grow, and we suggest that you come here and be the Hebrew teacher for the town. Start it. We just gave them an opportunity to take my uncle, Benny, to go with his father to America, and left my grandmother and her rest of the family there. About 1916, when I was born, he was beginning to accumulate houses, and he bought a 6-family house on what was known as Holyoke Street, because it was the street that went to Holyoke. And it was right across the street from Gray's Avenue, where we had the first synagogue, Gray's Avenue Synagogue. And my father, who was a chazan in the old country, became a chazan at the Gray's Avenue shul, the first one. Well, they couldn't speak English. It was a tough time. And what did you do in those days? You became a peddler. You could only show the products, sell them, and didn't have to talk. Well, my father did that. In the meantime, they were sending pennies and nickels and dimes to save to get the rest of the family over. And a few years later, they had accumulated a few $100s. And they brought over the rest of my grandmother, the 4 other girls, and the younger son.
Let me ask you to mention, you would tell me about your father, came from Russia.
He came over first, and then he got a job peddling.
Yeah, and then he sent for his family, he brought his family over later, yeah.
Family meaning his?
Mother, his father, and his sisters.
He did it all?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Tell me about your grandfather.
His name was Gershon Sedletsky.
And what did he do for a living?
He was a peddler.
And what did he peddle, do you know?
Yeah, he used to go up into the Granville and Granby and up into that section, and he'd collect eggs, and then he'd bring them into Springfield and peddle them.
But there were horses with carts going through the streets? Do you remember that?
Yeah, they were peddlers.
Well, the way they used to collect, well, peddlers were horse and wagon. I mean, the Jewish, where they sold vegetables and collected junk, went down with horse and wagon. This was done back in the 20s, 30s. And it was a horse and wagon. It was all horse and wagon. And I'll tell you what, the fruit peddlers would put up like a sign on the side of their wagon, you know, with their prices.
And the Iceman would sell blocks of ice
I
off
remember
of his truck.
When I lived on Calhoun Street, we didn't have a refrigerator. This is way back. My mother had to get ice, and she used to put a sign in the window. And the man that used to bring the ice was Mr. Rolitsky. And he'd see the sign, and he'd carry the ice upstairs to the ice box.
It was the size of what size, how much ice you wanted.
Yeah, how many pounds. And every corner, every side was another weight. And you turned it to the weight you wanted, the piece of ice you wanted.
Can you recall them coming down your street? And
all the time.
What would they cry out?
Well, junk and some of the fruit.
How about alte Sachen?
Well, they wouldn't say the trade was Gentile. Yeah, I mean, they covered the whole city.
People would come out with their junk.
People would kind of, if they had scrap iron or whatever, old paper.
My father first came, he was peddling fruit on a wagon. He peddled fruits and vegetables in a wagon.
He got into the
yardage store. He opened a small store to begin with, and he was selling only yardage to peddlers that went from house to house.
Dad's store, my father, by that time he started the usual conventional method, peddler, horse and buggy, but it built up a rather substantial store that was the beginning of a department store.
What did your father do for a living? His name was?
Nathan Frankel.
Frankel.
And he was a peddler.
A peddler.
Women's clothing. That's how we started out. I'm 94, 96 years ago. My father started out that way.
And he was peddling around Springfield?
He went around with a pack on his back, and then he opened a ladies' store in the North End of Springfield which would be 96 years old today.
Where was that store? What was it called?
Frankel's.
And what street was it on?
Main Street.
In the North End.
Oh, when my father started out as a peddler, one of his customers was Catherine Grodsky. And I wound up marrying her son. He lived on Whittier Street, and I lived on Prospect Street, and I went to Cheston Street Junior High. And after that, yeah, he went to Tech, and I went to Central up on State Street, and used to carry my books down the hill. We were childhood sweethearts.
I'm trying to remember some of the stores that were in that area. There were so many of them on the north, and I'd say that 90% of them were Jewish. And on the other side, on this side, the southern side of the arch, there were stores and stores and stores of women's clothing and men's and shoes and everything, and most of them were owned by Jews or run by Jews.
Oh, Ferry Street ran from Main Street to Dwight Street, and it was, if you will, the Jewish center, shopping center of Springfield.
You could go on Ferry Street on Friday or Saturday and see everybody in the city there, in the bakery or in the deli.
In the 20s, the Jewish shopping, to a great extent, was on Ferry Street, which no longer exists. And that became a casualty of urban renewal.
And it was a real Jewish neighborhood.
Very Jewish neighborhood, yeah. You went on Yontif, everybody was dressed in Yontif clothes, and the kids would walk from one shul to the other, you know, to see each other. It was very, very nice.
Because I remember growing on...
Well, she was a North End girl, I wasn't.
Yeah.
And the shopping area.
This was the kosher
oh, that whole area was strictly
totally kosher.
This is where everybody came to shop.
Yeah.
Going further down Ferry Street,
Are we going west or east?
we're going east.
Mm-hmm.
There was Tannenbaum's Grocery. There was a butcher shop, I don't remember the name. But across the street was a fish market owned by Antiles. Going back to the north side of Ferry Street, there were 3 more butcher shops.
Were they all kosher?
Oh, definitely. There wasn't a non-kosher store on Ferry Street.
The fish Antiles is a Jewish name?
Antiles was a Jewish name.
And the butchers, were they Romanian, Russian? Where were they from?
Iberal.
Overall.
There was Brown's, from whom my mother always bought.
Why would you go to one butcher over another one?
Why? Because Mr. Brown came from the same shtetl that my mother came from.
Which was?
She came from a small town in Lithuania called Aran. And she also lived in a shtetl called Alite. But it was from Aran that Mr. Brown and his family came.
Did they know each other in the old country?
Yes.
They did.
They did. So we had, in Springfield at one time, there were like 7 kosher butchers. Only one true fish market. That was Mr. Antiles.
Were the fish alive? You'd come in there and...
Both.
They were from Boston?
Veldes, probably from Boston.
Fresh fish.
Fresh.
Swimming and not swimming.
They had them both ways. He had some come in that were packed in ice already.
Uh-huh.
Others came in they were still flopping. You pick out what you wanted, and he'd clean it for you.
My father had a very small store on one corner and sold yardage only to peddlers, or anyone that came in actually, but mostly peddlers. Then he moved across the street and he had Bilski's department store.
There was a Bilski's department store on opposite Ferry Street. In other words, it was on Dwight Street, facing, when you came to the end of Ferry Street onto Dwight Street, there was Bilski's.
And it was one of the first discounts. It was the first discount store in the city. And he
In the
used
country.
to. Well, I don't know about that.
There was a Goss's Delicatessen. Walking down, that was on the left-hand side of the street. Walking a little further, about 200 feet, there was Schneider's Delicatessen, and right next door was Dom's Bakery. After World War II, on the right-hand side of the street, Benny's Delicatessen opened up. Benny's initially was on Main Street near the Arch.
Every Saturday, people were there buying deli.
Saturday night after Shabbos, and
After
Friday
Shabbos,
before
right.
Shabbos.
Right.
Yeah. And
So
Schneider's Deli was the best in the city. His corned
Would
beef was-
non-Jews come over there also?
Oh, yes.
They would.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. You had a
yes,
lot of non-Jewish
yes,
customers.
yes.
I don't believe it was any wider than this room. And it was a beautifully kept store. He sold deli, and then he also had a couple of tables. But that was the extent. Benny's, on the other hand, was a regular delicatessen where you went in to eat.
And that was known all over, Benny's Delicatessen.
Benny, and I'll tell you, I used to, when I went to Cheder, when I first went to Cheder, I was 8. I'd go by to go to Main Street to get the trolley. I would pass by Benny's, and he had a pan of baked beans, and on the other side were hot dogs on the griddle. And I would look in there,
And tell them about magaziners.
A magaziner. In their window, they had cupcakes, and they had...
Oh, those cupcakes, how we used to drool.
On Dwight Street, there was a Penn's travel agency. He loaned money to the Jewish people. He would arrange to contact people overseas for family, you know. That's what he did, besides travel.
So if you wanted to bring someone out of France or Germany or Russia, he would make the arrangements.
He would help. On the corner of Church Street and Dwight Street one corner was Yankee Oil Company, and it was owned by the Schwartz brothers. And across the street from that was the Moses Hebrew School.
Tell me about the Moses Hebrew School.
It was like a house.
It was a house.
Yes, it was a house.
Yeah, which had a Hebrew school in it?
It had a Hebrew school in it, yes, and Mr. Moses and Mrs. Moses both taught Hebrew.
They're very, very nice people.
I think she was a pretty, nice lady. And she had a family. They lived in the house that they taught school in.
And they took their...
This was a Hebrew school?
It was a Hebrew school.
But they lived
took their living room and converted it into a
This is in the afternoon?
In the afternoon. Yes. Anyway. Further down Dwight Street, there was a grocery store called Barney's, where you could go in and get a herring out of the barrel and a pickle out of the barrel, and it was everybody used to shop there in the North End.
And there was a big grocery store where everybody would meet, and they had a big barrel of pickles out in front. It was just like you read about it in the east side of New York. That store was there, and everyone met there. Everyone exchanged greetings there. That was the meeting place in the North End.
On Main Street, there was my father's Frankel's. There was my uncle B. Levine and Sons, men's haberdashery. There was a youth center by the Leff family. There was another ladies' dress shop ran by the Bergs, another Jewish family.
A lot of Jewish families had businesses on the Main Street.
Right, one after the other.
Going further down Dwight Street, when you come to Essex Street, there was the chicken place, the kosher chickens, where you could go in, get a live chicken, they kill it, and pull the feathers out for you. And one place, and one of the owners was Mrs. Zandon. That was closer to Dwight Street. Then there was another one further down the street that was owned by somebody else, but also kosher chickens.
Chicken we got from the chicken dealer.
Separate dealer was a chicken.
Separate, of course. On 10th Street, there was Zanden's Poultry. You go in there, they'd shuck the chicken for you. You pick out your own chicken. They had their own shechet, and you'd pluck your chicken. If you didn't want to pluck it, you'd pay 10 cents extra, and they had an elderly woman there pluck it for you.
At that time, when I came to Springfield, there were 8 rabbis that were shachtim. They shachted the chickens and stuff. 8.
8.
And every chicken market had a shechet.
You actually had chicken markets attached to the butcher shops, I guess.
There were no frozen chickens in the world then. If you wanted a chicken for Shabbos, you went to the chicken market. You picked out a chicken, the shechet shachted it for you, and the workers there plucked the feathers. You had to go home and open the chicken and kasher it with salt to kasher it to make it kosher. And the same thing with the meat. You bought meat, you had to go home and kasher it. It's a different world today.
The Jewish community surrounded this shopping area?
Originally, my folks told me, this was before I was born, they told me that when they came to Springfield, originally they lived for a short time on Ferry Street. So families did live there. The immigrants settled there, and they had their stores around them. Then they began to branch out a little bit, you know, as they became more secure, more financially successful. And then my folks, again, this is before my time, Gray's Avenue is where the synagogue was. That was, Beth Israel started on Gray's Avenue. And the Jews settled on...
Nearby.
Yeah, around that.
Ferry Street, in a sense, was against the railroad tracks. It was about 2 streets over from the railroad tracks.
But Jewish families lived there originally.
But going down, heading north, there was Congress Street. There was, what else? 10th Street, and
10th Street,
and Franklin Street, and Greenwood Street.
Dwight.
And that's where the Jews,
original North End.
The Jews lived there originally, and then they moved again further north.
Tell me about your mother. Where was she? Where did she live?
Patton Street.
Uh-huh.
That's where I was born.
And she lived on Patton Street?
Yeah. And I was born in 15.
How did you decide where to live in Springfield? Where did you first live, and then where did you move to? And how did you know each time where to move to?
Well, of course, I wasn't here when my parents moved to Springfield.
Okay. And where did they live? Where was their house?
When they came first to Springfield...
In 1921?
They came here in 1921, February 1921. And they rented on what was then Morgan Street. As a matter of fact, I was born on Morgan Street. And from there we moved, when I was about maybe a year old, we moved to Bell Street.
North End?
Also in the North End, but the near North End. What we call the near North End.
What does that mean?
We were closer to the center of Springfield than the old North End. Most of the Jewish population was in the North End.
And were most of the homes tenements around this area, or were they private homes? How would you describe it?
Mostly were private homes. Or they rented.
Well, there was trust with everybody. Because everybody knew everybody else. Nobody ever had a key to the front door of their house. I remember as a kid, the key that fit my mother's front door fit everybody else's front. It was a skeleton key. And you could walk in and out of it, but nobody ever locked the doors anyway. The doors were always open because we didn't have a crime problem. We didn't have a stealing. Everybody trusted everybody. It was a mixed neighborhood.
Irish?
Irish. Yes. A lot of Irish were French. Also. French. It was near the Springfield Hospital. Calhoun Street is near the Springfield Hospital. A lot of French people.
Did you have friends who were Irish and French?
Sure,
We grew up with the Irish and the French.
I had a lot of, on Prospect Street, non-Jewish neighbors. Yes, and I would say they were my friends. Yes. O'Neill, I can think of that name.
Yeah.
That South End district was a magnificent place. I was born on Acushnet Avenue, which is in the Italian section, and it was such a wonderful place to live with all their activities and festivities and christenings and marches in the street with the holy images that they carried and the lights and the music. It was really, and no crime in those days. And Dad had a store that was very, very successful.
What did he sell in his store?
It was a dry goods store and children's specialty shop.
What was it called?
It was called Cooley's Dry Goods Store. It's still a large building on South Main Street that's now occupied by Field Eddy.
Were there people who would take in boarders for a night?
Oh, yeah. Yes, everybody was taking in boarders. Yeah, if you had an empty bedroom and somebody came from Europe and had no place to live, somebody would take them in.
Getting back to the older days down in the North End, there were several shuls there. The Gray's Avenue shul closed out, and they moved to Chestnut Street, where they had a different shul, Beth Israel. There was a Congress Street shul. There was a Russian shul on Dwight Street, near Jefferson Avenue.
Who were the rabbis in those days, in those shuls?
Rabbi Shenkov.
What congregation did he have?
He was the chief rabbi of the city. It's called all the four synagogues. He took care of all the four synagogues very well. He ran the city well. The questions came up about kashrus and that. He was very good. Took care very well.
Now we're going to get into the my association with Kesser Israel. And we were under the jurisdiction of the chief rabbi of the Orthodox community, which at that time consisted in the North End of Beth Israel, B'nai Jacob, which was Orthodox, Kesser Israel, and B'nai Israel, or the Rosh Hashanah. About 1932 or 33, my father, he became a member of Kesser Israel. Now, Kesser Israel at that time was located on the corner of Chestnut and Franklin. It was a converted mansion. The main sanctuary, if you want to call it, was where the men sat, was on the ground floor. And then they had a balcony, and that was for the women. I think it must have held, between men and women, it could have held about 250 people, 200 people possibly. And we didn't have a rabbi, but we did have a chazan. We had, when I went there, we had a chazan Levine, who later went to Beth Israel. But we were, and in the sort of in the back was a kitchen, kum, vestry, because that's where we davened for during the week. And it also had, as I said, a stove there. And breakfast was served at all times. The leadership and the membership consisted of peddlers, some tradesmen, and some businessmen.
At that time, the Jewish community was still flourishing in the North End. There were 4 synagogues in the North End, and a lot of Jews still lived there. And gradually, the community started moving out. But at that time, it was a flourishing community with Jewish butchers all around on Dwight Street, and Jewish bakeries and Jewish groceries. It was a very vibrant Jewish community. And the building that we are in now, this 188 Sumner Avenue, was a focal point. Everyone walked by here, they saw the building and saw the sign, and they came in. Very warm place. We also had services here on the high holidays. Shana and Kippur, Sukkot, and we had a big Sukkah party for all the adults and children in Springfield. They all came here. This was a very wonderful meeting place for the Jewry of Springfield. I was sent here in 1950 by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in New York to become the principal of the Lubavitcher Yeshiva here in Springfield. And a few months after I came, we bought the building right here on 188 Sumner Avenue from the Sinai Temple. And the building was in beautiful condition. It was all set up. We had a main room for services they used to have. And we put in an ark for the Torah, and we had services here for Shabbos. But the main thing here was the school itself. We set up the school, we had a kindergarten, we had the classrooms.
My first memories of the yeshiva were as a preschooler. My mother told me that I started here at the age of 3.
What year would that be approximately?
That would have been 1951. Yeah, see, I'm looking at this. This would have been the kindergarten class.
Which one are you in the picture?
I'm the one right in the front.
Can you hold
Smiling?
the picture up?
Sure. I'm the student right up in the front.
The majority of the students came from the North End. We had a big bus that picked them up. Went all over the city, picked up the children every morning and took them home.
And my memories are of a yellow school bus coming to the house to pick me up. Rabbi Edelman rode on the bus at that time and picked the children up and on the way home. The bus driver's name was Max, and I remember Max vividly because when he would drop me off, if my mother wasn't home, he would take me around, and once in a while he would buy children ice cream cones at the at a corner store. And actually, my first memories then of a classroom are in this actual room. This was either the preschool or the kindergarten classroom. My teacher was Miss Stam. That I found out later that was short for Stambovsky, but everyone called her Miss Stam.
What's your memory of these rabbis?
Always warm, nurturing individuals that I think just helped promote a very warm and positive atmosphere within the classroom. Showed a great deal of love for the children. Some of the other random thoughts and memories of my experiences here are picnics on Log Bomir. We would go as a class. That was a field trip. I remember Rabbi Edelman playing baseball with us. I remember him taking a group of us to a Farbrengen at 770 Eastern Parkway, where the Lubavitcher Rebbe was in blessed memory.
And did you have Talmud classes here for adults also,
Yeah,
like a Beit Midrash?
We started a Talmud class, and it's still going on today for adults. And for many years we had Rabbi Schenkup, who came and he gave the lecture. And this was one of the finest lectures given to any group in the country. He was a genius, and he just had a love of learning. He was right here.
What years was that about? Was that 1950s or later?
In the 50s into the 60s, yes. And I came in 1950, 10 years later, when the Rebbe had been in America already. So the Jews in the Kesser Israel told me that we received a telegram from the office in New York to save the Rebbe from the Nazis. He's imprisoned by the Nazis. We need to send some money. And the share for Springfield is $900. So the President Kronitsky told me, we sent back the $900 by return telegram. We didn't waste a moment to save the Rebbe's life. And that's how he was saved.
So Springfield was very close to him.
Very close to him, yeah. And that's why he, when he started the Lubavitcher yeshivas, one of the first ones in 1945 was Springfield.
What's your memory of the Rosh Shul?
The Rosh Shul was a very warm place to daven. The whole shul was just a warm feeling. Before the davening, people would come in, they said Psalm, they didn't waste any time talking. They would say Tillim. Say Tillim in the shul and they come together. I loved the davening. I used to read the Torah for them there. It was a very nice, good place.
So on Shabbos, your husband would walk over here and you'd stay home?
My husband walked, no, at that point there was a shul, at that time there was two Orthodox shuls downtown in Springfield. One on Chestnut Street and one on Dwight Street. Right. And we used to go to the shul on Dwight Street. There was a shul.
What do you remember of that shul?
That was also a very nice shul. There was a lot of people used to come all the time, and everybody lived within easy walking distance from there. You know, as a young married woman, it seemed like there was a lot of women all the time. I mean, a lot of people there all the time. And you knew everybody because everybody was a neighbor of yours, whether to the right or the left or across the street, but everybody knew each other. And then there was another shul on the next street over, so it was like one happy family.
When your family moved to Forest Park, they called him the Yankee. Yeah, you mean the Jewish community considered him the Yankee?
There were very few Jews up here. They didn't have a synagogue, but there were enough Jews to have a minyan. And Frank Zirkin, who was a furrier, and his brothers were all furriers, let him use the front living room as their shul. It was on Dickinson Street, not far from the corner of where all the streets meet.
The X.
From the X. So that was the beginning of Kadima. And my father davened for them a couple of years, and then as the community grew, and we moved up to West Albert and Rittenhouse, which is like one street away. They took the hall that's over the corner of Sumner Avenue and White Street. There's a corner, it's this big, and they davened there. I remember going as a kid there. I must have been about 7 years old, 6, 7. Then they decided they wanted to start building a shul. So around 1924, I think. By this time we had enough Jews in Forest Park to feel that we could run a shul. So we bought this property on Oakland Street. We'll go back to the first Kadima. Well, when that was built, I remember the place became so crowded that on holidays there was no place to sit. The women were upstairs, and downstairs the men were crowded. It was jammed. And we had more members than we could handle. We even used the downstairs. It used to be the shul before we built the upper part for holiday services. And downstairs, we let the men and women sit together.
We lived on Sumner Terrace, which is directly the next street to where the Kadima Senate ultimately set up. And we were great tennis players because the tennis courts were directly across the street. But at an early stage, whenever there wasn't a minyan in shul, the shamash used to come over to Forest Park and pull us off the course. We were practically living on the court because it was right across the street from where we lived. So that at an early age, I really became pretty proficient, not only at making a minyan, but I knew a little bit, a lot than most kids did about davening because I was there all the time.
You'd be wearing your tennis outfit, they'd take you right into shul.
Right to the shul.
The Kadima would have, when I came up here, 400 people Saturday morning. 200 children downstairs service. Every Shabbos. Rabbi Norman Lamb was the rabbi. They built a new building because in the high holidays, the shul held 400. Downstairs, they packed in another few hundred. But they needed a general sanctuary for everybody, so they built a new building that holds 1,000 people.
Can we go back for a moment to the North End?
Right.
Can you recall urban renewal when it came?
Yes, it came in the 60s. There were only 2 Jewish synagogues affected. Beth Israel was not affected. The Sons of Israel, which was then on the corner, practically on the corner of Jefferson Avenue and...
Between Bancroft.
Between Bancroft, on White Street, between Bancroft and Jefferson Avenue, was not affected. There were only 2 Jewish... And at that time, the Jewish community was disappearing. The Jewish had moved to the park, and from the park it was moving to the Long Island.
Also, Harry, they moved up closer to the Shriners Hospital in that area, Narragansett Street. So there was a nucleus of Jews there.
But the trend was downward.
It was already happening.
It was already happening.
We called them the All-Righticus, the ones who were able to move to Forest Park.
But actually, by 65, when in the 60s, the trend was definitely down.
So can you tell me, at some point, the kosher establishments started disappearing?
After the kosher butchers started to leave, closed down.
Had the Crown Market for a little while, and even they disappeared. They were on the corner of Fort Pleasant Avenue and Fort Pleasant and Sumner. Nice, beautiful Jewish market. Everything Jewish. Kosher meat, everything.
Why did they leave? Well, the people became more affluent and they moved into the park, and the old people went to go to heaven. And the children didn't stay in the North End. They moved out.
The younger people aren't living here anymore. They're all going all over the world. Our family is typical.
When the children grew up in Springfield, they went to college. And they got a taste of the larger cities, the larger communities, so they don't come back to Springfield. There's no continuation of the families here.
We still recognize that we're Jews.
Yeah.
But in today's society, it's a different living style. But again, we're spread so far apart, we've lost our roots.
No, the Lubavitch always has a positive outlook on everything. You don't count people by numbers, you count people by the good deeds they do. And the city itself is very coherent. When the Federation calls a general meeting, the whole city comes. The whole city comes and takes part. I want to thank you very much for calling me down and taking an interest in the Jewish life of this community. If you know the background, you know where we descended from, then you know how to go forward in a great way, in a good way, in a happy way, in a successful way.
Mein Städtele Welt, meine Heimele wie ich hab meine kindrische Jür verbracht. Sind ihr amul gewesen in Welt, meine Heimele Welt, meine Heimele wie ich hab mit die Kinderle dort gelacht. Jeden Schabes pfleg ich laufen dort mit dem chemisch Kleid. Sitzen hinter dem kleinen Beim alle lernen bei dem Tag. Mein Städtele Welt, meine Heimele wie ich hab gehabt die schöne Halloy mit Sassa.